throughout the poem Exposure, you have the refrain, but nothing happens. Now, at the beginning, the poem really talks about the exposure to, like, the merciless Dice East winds, dawn, massing her army, like ranks on ranks of shivering grey. We have this idea of war lasts, rain soaked, storms, clouds sag stormy. We have this idea of this just constant, oppressive weather, these awful, painful, both mentally and physical conditions. But nothing happens. And that really we're supposed to take from that. But war doesn't come, but nothing happens. They want something to happen. Presumably war. Want to get to the war, get to the fighting, survive, and eventually win the war. So they want something to happen, but nothing happens. It is a poem about stasis and imprisonment. How war has imprisoned them in these almost hellish conditions. But by the end of the poem, when we start to have lines for, is it that we are dying? For the love of God seems dying. When he talks about not being able to return home when the doors are closed, this but nothing happens seems to take on a double meaning. But nothing happens could mean but nothing is done. We are suffering, but nothing happens. The pain is unmanageable, but nothing happens. This all seems futile, but nothing happens. We can never go home, but nothing happens. Men are dying, and nothing happens. Do you see how that tone could mean but nothing is done, and could therefore be a criticism of governments and the monarchy? They're the people who'd create war, governments and the monarchy. And it could be a criticism that they've not done enough, that the men are suffering, and nothing has changed. So, for example, one of the reasons why men suffered is because they didn't have the right equipment. Because they needed bodies so much, they were given less than optimal training, and they weren't given good enough equipment, especially not good enough equipment for the cold. So a lot of the issues that happened, such as trench foot, such as men freezing to death, that was because of the equipment that they had was not good enough for the conditions that they were going to be in. And that could be a criticism of the government and monarchy for not providing their soldiers with the right support for war. But nothing happens. They're just trapped and stuck there, and it's almost as if no one cares. And he ends the poem really interestingly. Okay. Near the end of the poem, he says, all their eyes are ice. The end of the poem is an image of a burial. They've got the pits, and they're burying the people that have died. And it almost seems, because but nothing happens, it seems like this happens all the time and nothing really changes. And within this burial, we have this image of half-known faces. So in this hour and this us, there's all of these people, but they're half-known because they're in war and they don't get to know each other. These people who die without really knowing who they're around. And all their eyes are ice. So this death is described as ice. Their eyes are frozen over because they're dead. They're no longer looking out of them. And that's really interesting if you think about the beginning of the poem, the merciless iced east winds. And we have the idea, the connection, that this exposure leads to death. That their eyes are ice. So then when you come back to this refrain, but nothing happens, it is incredibly powerful. The refrain almost takes on a new meaning of how can we let this happen? And because it is from a personal perspective, it has a powerful impact on the reader, because we know this is reality. There is something truthful and honest about this poem, and therefore its criticism is perhaps taken more real. And I suppose that then that but nothing happens, it emphasises that inescapable stasis that follows and almost haunts the soldiers, he subversively creates that perpetual stasis in order to denounce those jingoistic ideas of the glory of war. This is not a poem that glorifies war in any way, does it? So by repeating the word nothing, Owen is perhaps commenting on the way that war creates nothing. We can also read this as, but it is nothing that happens. What does war create? Nothing, only death. War creates no progress, no peace, no justice. And that is Owen's criticism.